Okay, hey everyone, this is the Good Captain, and welcome to my first hosted video. I have on the line right now the Janus from the AxisAndAllies.org forums, and the topic of this discussion is going to be East and West. We're going to introduce the game and then review the two games that we just played on this channel. But also we're going to cover other topics as well, including how it got onto the map view. That's the program that hosts this game currently. And a few other topics as well, and we'll just kind of let it go wherever it goes. I've never played host, so you'll just have to forgive me if. But I'm just going to let the conversation kind of wander. So, just to introduce the game very quickly, East and West is a game that was released in the year 2000 by a company called Imp Games. It's now defunct. It saw a limited production run. Insofar as I've been able to try to find one on eBay for the last year and a half, it's unfindable. But at the time of its creation, the only, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Janus, but I believe the only version of Axis and Allies that were out was the original 80s version, and then the CD-ROM had, I think, just dropped shortly after or before this release. So it operates under third edition rules, which is what came out with the CD-ROM. And then it has some extra bells and whistles. Is that right?
I forget the order, but I think it wasn't Pacific and Europe. One was 99 and one was 2001. So those were right around the same time, but um, I don't think that would have impacted the designs of this per se because it was obviously had been in the works for a while.
Right, right. I agree. That's why. Yeah, I think they all kind of dropped at the same time. So, but no real game mechanics from those two are in this game. There's no sub stalling and some of the uniquenesses of destroyers or the unit destroyer doesn't even exist. So, yeah. So that's East and West, and I met the Janus, or we started playing games of East and West after, I actually don't even recall when, but somehow you got me, you sold me on playing this, which is interesting because I generally shy away from third-party variants, but I I can't remember
It's
what
funny how
sold
that
me.
worked out.
Yeah, go for it.
I just remember that you had posted, I forget which video it was, but I saw it in the Facebook group to Everything Access and Allies,
Uh-huh.
and that got me asking about a particular strategy, and I was like, oh, well, back in my day, we used to play East and West. You know, we always did this. And I'm like,
Right.
oh, this is interesting, and that just kind of got the ball rolling.
Huh, yeah. And I so I grinded or ground, I should say, through that manual, which it wasn't too hard, but I remember stumbling around a little bit on the first couple games, and you were very patient. And we were also both trying to, because it wasn't clear at the time that third edition rules was what it was operating under until we found the frequently asked questions, and then. Of course, I tried to roll that all up into one document and post it on one of the videos on my channel. But yeah, so we ended up playing. We're up to apparently 14 games. We're on our 15th, and that's why. Just I always like to resume ourselves or myself when we talk about Axis and Allies. That's why I think we might be qualified to say at least something about the game. And I think that's it. So let's see. Let's go to. Or unless you have any opening. Did you have any opening comments before we go to the first topic here?
Um, no, I think that's good to go.
Okay. So right now, I think I'll start with the map view because it kind of segues into
Mm.
the other things we're going to talk about. So currently, this game is basically not available. There was a limited production run, as I said earlier, and I forget. Do you have a copy?
I do. I actually have my
Wow.
copy, and then a friend of mine who also had a copy. I have his in storage. He kind of moved away, and his family was getting rid of some stuff, and he said, "Give it to Janice. He'll hold on to it for me."
Wow. And it's got plastic pieces and the whole 9 yards, right, in a map.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's the plastic pieces. It's not a full set. It is sort of an add-on to. You're meant to use it with your classic set of Axis and Allies, similar
Mm-hmm.
to I think World at War does the same thing.
Yeah, it
Um,
does.
But yeah, it's got all the control markers. It's got the nuclear markers, and couple new units and such like that. So
Very
I
cool.
have a physical copy. Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
So
so you are the owner of a unicorn, and if you have one, dear listener, you are the holder of a unicorn as well. But
yeah.
it is on map view, which I think is what probably saved this game, because if it wasn't,
Oh,
there wouldn't be any platform I know of that supports it at all, which is contrary to Axis and Allies. There's at least four that I know of, that probably more like five, that platform the classic or even global games. So it survives on map view, and yeah, why don't you tell us what you know about that, because it's kind of an interesting story, I think you were saying as well.
yeah. So ultimately, back in the day, shortly after the game was sort of made available, um, Mott, who is on the forums, the accessnowice.org forums, I think his account is MottDC. He actually made this app, and I guess approached the people at Imp Games and was like, "Hey, do you want to put your game into this app that I created?" So what you could do is you could buy the physical game, or you could just buy the electronic version, which is essentially you could download the module for East and West and their other games, but you could move the pieces around and you could add the tabs and such. But you couldn't save the game. It says, "Oh, this requires registration in order to save your game to use that feature."
Right.
So essentially, what they would do is, if you bought the electronic version or if you bought a physical version, they would issue you basically like a CD key, and that
Yeah.
would unlock the ability to save the game. And so that was just to make sure that you paid for it. That was how they did it. Now, fast forward 20 years, roughly to present day. Well, the website's gone, the company's defunct. So unless you have the old install on your Windows 95 or 98 rig with the registration key in there, you weren't able to save your games anymore. So even if you were playing by email, if you wanted to set up a map, you would effectively have to recreate the entire map every turn that you did or every phase that you did because you weren't able to save it.
Ouch. Wow.
Yes. So I stumbled across the Everything Access Now Is group, and I posted
Hmm.
something about East and West, just saying, is there anybody here who's familiar with this or would like to play this? And Watt actually was in that group, and he got a hold of me, and the conversation kind of progressed, and he basically said, "Well, I have the ability to unlock those modules, but I wouldn't want to do it without permission from Imp Games." And I said, "Okay." So I did some basically internet detectiving and got a hold of someone who put me in touch with someone who gave me an email address, and I for someone who was at Imp Games, and I said, there's still some conversation about the game. People are interested in playing it. Would you be willing to unlock these modules so that we can use it in MapView? And I heard nothing.
Uh huh.
So I was kind of like, okay, well, that was kind of, my last lead. The trail kind of went cold, and I just said, okay, well, I guess it is what it is. So you had gotten, I think we had gotten in touch. So you were really interested in actually playing it because that's your thing. Is like playing the game is the fun part.
Right.
Um, so I think about a year went by. I don't remember exactly why, but in the forum thread, people were asking about the map and asking about playing the games. And Mott showed up in the thread and just casually mentioned, "Well, if you were able to get permission from the Imp Games guys, I could unlock this module for you." And I guess I should add that I didn't really have a great reputation with them, so I think that had to do with them not answering with me.
The
The
game
nickname they had
designers?
given me, yeah, the Imp Games guys, the nickname they had given me on the forums was Gadfly.
Oh.
Another thing you need to remember is in 2000 I was a teenager in high school, so of course I knew everything, and probably my posting on the internet reflected it, and
I see.
that was well deserved. So, anyway, against my typical character of I hate repeating myself, so the idea of just sending someone an email to ask the same thing again uh, is not my cup of tea. But I went ahead with it, and I just said, "Hey, just asking, there's some people looking to play the game. Watt said that he would be willing to unlock these modules for us, but he wants your permission." Uh, so I sent off another email, and I got a message back being, "Can you put us in touch with Mott?" And I said, "Okay." So I went back to Mott, got his contacts, and sent that along, and waited a couple days, I think less than a week, maybe 5 days, and didn't hear anything. But then Mott got a hold of me and he said, "Hey, I don't know if they told you anything, but I got in touch with Imp Games. They got a hold of me and they gave us the thumbs up. We got the green light. So, basically he had to make some changes in the application and
Wow.
we'll put it up somewhere we can download it. But here we are today, 20 years later ish, 23 years something, and we have this you know this application to help us be able to facilitate actually playing the game.
Right. And they made another game too. It's on there as well. It's a World War One game, whereas this
Yes.
is a Cold War scenario.
Yes. So my understanding is the Great War never actually got into physical production, and it was just basically came down to um, the expense of doing unique sculpts. So that's one thing I should mention. The pieces for um, East and West, the infantry that they used are actually they use four different colors, but they're all exactly like the German infantry from Classic.
Ah.
So they obviously copied a sculpt somehow or another.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for
Hmm.
the World War One game, because there were different pieces, they wanted to make everything unique, but it was really prohibitive in terms of cost. So it only ever existed in the electronic version, and there was a lot of playtesting and changing the rules and stuff like that. And they also made there's another game in there that's called the Crucible, and it's kind of not not quite like Risk. But it is trying to be a kind of every man for himself game, and
Hmm.
so there were that had its fans, but the website kind of the forums got taken over by spam bots, and it just kind of died out a slow, painful death eventually.
Right. Okay. This might dovetail nicely into the next point of discussion, which is how did you hear about it? And the, and I have this copy of World at War, but
Yeah.
the striking similarities between East and West and Xeno games.
So I think I heard about it from Thrasher's Access and Eyes website. So I don't know if you were familiar with that, but that was around that time back in the day. It was just you would collect scenarios that people had posted in or like sent into magazines and stuff. He would repost those, and then you could
Hmm.
download scenarios for the Iron Blitz game, and there was links to everything. Like there was links to World at War, there was links to East and West, and I think somehow through there I kind of globbed onto Imp Games East and West website, and it's interesting because one of the scenarios that they had on there was a World at War scenario, like a Cold War scenario using the World at War map. And someone had made like a little in paint. They had drawn the map with all the territories and the ownership and stuff. I was like, I was looking for a map that I could use to simulate the East and West map, and just like doing alternate scenarios and stuff like that. And I'm like, this map looks really similar. Like, there's a lot of similarities between this map and the East and West map. And that,
Right.
that was where I first clued in, was looking at that specific, I think it was 1950s or 60s Cold War scenario
Yeah.
on the World at War map. And I was, and like, my brain kind of made that connection. I was like, huh. Because I know back in the day, we all kind of just assumed, oh, this is, someone's hack of the classic map. But it's, no, I'm pretty sure it looks like it's a hack of the World at War map.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the rules too. I mean, the biggest thing is of course the infantry placement. Same as in World at War, at least that I know of in Xeno. I know Xeno made has a Europe and a Pacific. I can't remember. I can't. Isn't that sad? I don't even remember if I own the Pacific one or not. But I know I own the World at War, and it has infantry spawn in territories up to the value of their IPC. So if you have a 3 IPC value territory out on the front line, you can spam three infantry out of there like exactly like an industrial complex, but without having to pay for it. And then of course you can't place tanks or anything else. It's just infantry. This game also has the same aspect. Do you know if anybody was on the design team for both?
I don't believe so. My understanding is that the main designer for Imp Games was a guy from Iceland. Um, and there's two things I'll point out with that. You'll notice that it seems to be an excessive number of units in Iceland and East and West by my counting. Um, and if you look at the Crucible map, it's essentially there's like a border of land territories, and then there's like a lake in the middle, and in the middle of that there's an island, and everyone's like, this island bears a striking similarity to Iceland. So, um,
Hmm.
and I think they had some people working on the distribution side in the states, like somewhere on the East Coast.
Yeah.
The only other thing I can say is in not in the electronic copy of the rules, but in the physical book, there's an acknowledgement section, and one of the things that they said is, and thanks to Frank Z or Zed for our Canadian friends such as myself
Ah,
for
okay.
paving the way. So they didn't flat out say that Frank Zenow inspired them, the guy who made and designed World at War,
Uh-huh.
but there was an acknowledgement there. So I just kind of look at that as it supports my hypothesis that they were probably cribbing, you know, a map mostly from that.
Yeah, and the the uh, the maps are strikingly similar. Obviously, there's not a West Germany and East Germany, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
Georgia, and the breakup of the Caucasus and the East Ukraine from the original
Mm-hmm.
classic is very simple, or is the same as it's an offset four square territory set of territories, the same as in World at War. Finland's a separate country. There's all these. I think even
All
China
the
is broken up
all
in.
the tiny zero IPC islands that somehow made it into this game. Like,
Yeah.
I think the Canary Islands, I think, is actually like the Cape Verde Islands on the World at War map. They kind of misnomered that one, and
Mm-hmm.
then like in the Pacific, there should be on the World at War map. There's a line separating the Solomon Sea Zone from the New Hebrides.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
other
that's
than that,
fair.
like the influence chart covers up some of it, but by and large, like it's all the same stuff is in the same places.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I guess I would want to segue that to like, the one thing that we want to talk about is this game might be for you if
Yeah.
or
Yeah. That was the next one.
also yeah. What's your pitch for East and West? And I kind of include this one as a is considered an asset but is not necessary. Is like if you have some familiarity with the World at War map and those infantry mechanics, that would be considered an asset.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. If you had any experience with Xeno, if you liked the Xeno games or at least the World at War version, then you were gonna love East and West. If
mm,
you're a fan of, this is my opinion, if you're a fan of classic, because I am, I was
mm.
when I picked this up, and I still am. I still think that is pound for pound the best version of Axis and Allies. But that's another hour long
Yeah, you
podcast.
mentioned that in your anniversary series at the wrap up that kind of
Yeah,
stuck out.
right. The dopamine hit analogy. But
Yeah.
I also think that East and West, aside from people who want a nostalgic hit from Xeno, and aside from people who respected the original version, would also be, this is kind of niche, but I've met enough people. If you're a risk taker, or if you like chaos, I might say, like there is a chaotic
Mm.
element in this version of Axis and Allies, in this third party variant, that is, I think, within taste. And I mean that to say that
Mm.
there are a lot of house rules and third party variants that exist now that have a level of complexity and chaos. I kind of see those as adjacent. That is just
Mm.
overwhelming, and that works for a
It's a lot of
certain type.
Chrome.
Yeah, a lot of there. That's right. I like to say it reminds me of how I can't see the game through the Chrome. So
Yeah.
this is a game with just enough chrome, and the way they put the chrome on it is just with what I call the third dimension and spying and tech. The way tech is handled, I think is like nothing short of brilliant with regards to Axis and Allies and tech, because people
Mm.
were really unhappy with the original version. I think the current uh, version of it is, this is again my opinion, but I think it's a catastrophe and should just be never be used. But this seems, I think this, if you wanted to see what tech looked like right, I think this is right. So there's that, and then
Mm.
there's the political dimension. There's what happens when you drop a nuclear bomb, and all of it is, again, it sounds like a lot, but it all weaves into the game so nicely that if you're a person who's okay with a little bit of chaos, you're gonna
Mm.
love it. Conversely, if you're somebody who's a bean counter, this game might drive you a little crazy, but again, it's still within. It's not there's it's just not enough Chrome to say I can't see the game. It's definitely a game first, and the Chrome is added uh, in proportion. So yeah,
Yeah,
if you
I
like a little
think
bit of chaos,
I think one thing you should touch on in regards to that is it's not like World at War in the sense of it seems like every single neutral country has its own special rule
oh
entries
yeah,
in the book.
yeah,
Like in East and West, it's very stripped down. Now, the mechanics of it, it kind of makes it very random, and that's where you're talking about a little
yep,
bit.
yep,
But it's like there's for the most part, it's like you roll a die. If it's a one, this is what happens. It's not like, oh, Finland, their infantry defend on a 3, and Germany can influence them on turn 6 if this happens, or anything like
oh
that.
yeah,
It's
there you
it's
go.
very it's the bare minimum for what the game needs to do for the setting. Like, and it's very much in service of that.
I'm surprised you remember that about Finland. I thought you had, not to go back, but
I know there's a yeah, I know there's a rule where it's like if
yeah,
Germany collects 50 IPCs, they get one chance to influence Spain and
yeah, yeah.
things like that.
That's yeah,
Yeah.
well done. Okay. Um,
Um,
so
yeah, the other things that I would kind of zero in on is obviously if you have a familiarity with third edition rules. So if you played
that's fair.
Classic and specifically the Iron Blitz rules,
Yeah,
there isn't a lot different from that. Like a cruiser is just a battleship with different numbers,
yeah,
right? Like a heavy tank is just a tank with different numbers. Even
yeah.
if you get to the self-propelled artillery, that's you could just say it's an infantry but with different numbers. It's not doing anything wildly different from that rule set.
Hmm.
So if you like those mechanics and you have some interest in playing in this setting, and especially I think the fact that it's on a world map, like I think to some people it's not really Axis and Allies if it's not the world, and I think that like Larry Harris said that when he was first coming out with the game, he's like, well, it has to be a map of the world. Like, how else could you do it?
Right.
So I think that those points are kind of pick any one or two or three of those things, and if that applies to you, then give this a look. I would say.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great addition. So yeah, um, no disagreement there. And I think unless I missed anything, are we ready to talk about the games?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you kind of had wanted to talk a little bit about this tech and the spying. Did you kind of cover everything you wanted to?
Oh well, no, yeah, I can go into more. Yeah, I love to talk about that stuff. So yeah, just so
Hmm.
everyone who's hearing this has a rundown of it. Just if you played the classic, if you thought of classic, and let's do spying first. Spying is a 10 IPC investment, and each faction gets one, except for Russia, they can get two, and there's a reason for that. But we won't go into that far into the detail. But basically, if it survives until your next turn, um, from the beginning of your next turn there on out, unless he is assassinated by the opponent's spy, you can roll on one of three. You can roll a dice and hope to get a one on one of three essentially tables. That's counterintelligence, where you try to snipe off one of your enemy's spies. Diplomacy, which is where you can influence other countries to your side, or alliances to your side, because there's essentially neutral alliances, and there's benefits to doing one or the other. It's not like there's incentive to one and incentive to the other. Uh, and then finally, espionage, where you can literally steal. If you roll a one, you steal your opponent's technology. So that's
And it's important to point out that each side starts with one tech. So the U.S. starts with the nuke tech, and
right.
the Soviets start with the heavy armor tech.
Hmm.
So right out of the gate, if you buy a spy, that's an option that's open to you.
That's a good point. Yeah, and that's nice, because then the tech was the other thing I was going to talk about. And again, there's this just been this, to me, it's just, nobody I think the first I thought classic had it perfectly. I thought tech was nailed right on the head. It's not an optional rule, and there's a one that nukes essentially brings the game to a quick and abrupt finish. If
Yeah.
so the loser always can punt essentially. So if you're losing the game, you can always punt in classic, and either make it a good game again, or catch the win, or just miss something, and go to defeat anyway. But on this game, um, this one,
Right.
yeah, there's actually four tracks, and you cannot fall out. You can choose which track to invest in, and you can invest up to one die each turn on each track. So 4 tracks, you could have up to 4 dice. They have varying costs. They're either 3, 5, or 6, and you can put one on each, and for each breakthrough, I forget if it's a one. A one is a breakthrough, and a two is a half breakthrough essentially, and so there's three techs on each track, and one, two, three, four, six rungs essentially. So you can always the investment in tech is not like it was in classic, where you're just basically throwing if you're desperate, is the way that I felt the better players used it in classic. Here it's actually uh, there's one other aspect to this, is that one free tech for US and one free tech for USSR available to them every single turn. So there's always tech is always happening. There eventually the probability of either getting a minor breakthrough or a major breakthrough is going to accrue, and your opponent will eventually get the Russians will eventually get the bomb, or could eventually get the bomb. Uh, Eventually, this on a long enough timeline, everybody gets every tech because there's at least a free tech. Did you have anything?
The other thing, so aside from nuclear tech, NATO is allowed to share technology.
Oh yeah.
So basically, once you get the first tech in one of the four trees, you can give your allies a half step in that track, and then they have to earn the next half step. But you can do that for each of the three technologies. You can give them that half step for each one.
Except for the nuclear
Yeah.
weapons tree, right? That one they can't share. Okay, so and then we can touch on this, but there's an influence table that's essentially those three major alliances I spoke about earlier, and you can choose to influence them. They don't come in to fight up with you, but they do send you more money and allow you access to their territories. That's South American, the Organization of South America or something, and then
Organization of American States.
there it is, and
Yeah.
then that, which is AKA South America, then the Arab League, which is all the Middle East, and then China. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that pretty much ties it up.
Yeah. The only um, what's the word I'm looking for? Exceptions to that is obviously the North Korea rule pertaining to China, and
uh,
then also the Suez Canal, which is obviously pertinent to the game that we actually played.
yes, that's and we can end with the canal because then we can dovetail into the. Although that's the first game. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so there's a special rule that so long as China is providing USSR IPCs, then they also send 6 infantry into North Korea, and they're just 6 infantry that sit there and help defend. They don't attack. But as soon as that support drops below the point where they're sending the USSR money, they disappear, and this can be extremely inconvenient because it happens instantaneously. So if the U.S.
Yeah.
At the top of the U.S. turn, if you're expecting those 6 infantry to be there, and then the U.S. spy rolls a 1, and he diplomatically convinces China to move one peg down on the chart and send no more money to the Russians, they also disappear those 6 infantry. So you can essentially mobility kill or
And
eliminate 6 guys you might have been depending on.
yeah, and the secondary thing about that is the USSR has to actually control North Korea. So even if the Allies
Right,
leave it empty, those Chinese infantry aren't going to go in and attack and take it back for the Soviets.
right, right.
So
It's purely
the other
defensive.
stipulation for that rule.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then and this we might just start with that game then, because the Suez
Okay.
Canal rule was one that I didn't even again, I probably need to reread the rules, but you were kind enough to sort of turn yourself in, so to speak. So just to lay the context here, the Janus dropped a nuclear bomb as NATO, and you have to roll on this thing called the complications table, and just over half the time some ill effect occurs when you roll on the nuclear complications table as NATO. And the ill effect that happened in that game was the Arab nations moved one peg in favor of the Soviets, and that apparently by game rule is just enough to close the Suez Canal. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
only open to both sides if they stay right in the middle where they start the game.
right, right,
So they don't have to be giving income to the Soviets, but because they move from that zero to the minus zero, if you want to call it,
yeah,
that closes the game.
yeah, and that was Oh, that was the just the most recent game, so that's perfect. Now we can probably
Yep.
dovetail into that because
Yeah.
that ended up being, I think, fairly critical. Or I mean, it would you would be able to you'd be the authority on that because the strategy that the Janus used in this game we were playing most recently on YouTube was to shuck troops, British and NATO, Western European troops into Pakistan and just build it up. And part of
Mm.
that shuck was, or ended up being, moving through the canal quite a bit. And then it closed when it looked like half the Navy was on one side and half was on the other. But you would have more to say, so I'll just toss it to you. What was your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually kind of left a comment on the video about that in particular. But essentially,
Oh,
I had wanted to. My original plan was that by that turn I would have moved the entire navy to into the Mediterranean,
hmm.
but because I was able to take some more territories with the British, I had some extra income. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll put an infantry in Ceylon and here and there, and I'll use
Ah,
that transport for one more turn, kind of thing. And the same with the infantry that I was placing in Africa as Western Europe. So that's okay. I guess I kind of got greedy. Maybe it was a bridge too far,
I
so to speak.
see.
Um, yeah, and then
That's interesting.
so I had meant to have my navy all in the Mediterranean by before that nuke went off, but I kind of did a called an audible at the line of scrimmage, so to speak, and ended up with my navy getting split up.
Yeah. Yeah, that was truly bizarre for me because I was just surprised. I saw all of a sudden saw this thing closed. I was like, closed,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah.
I started trying to figure out if I could make anything of that. But of all the games we've played, that one, the one where the Suez Canal was closed, the most recent game was. It
Mhm.
felt to me the most competitive. I was definitely on the ropes as the Soviet player. I always feel like the Soviets are. I don't know if I still feel this way, but I because it was so close. But I was like, yeah, the Soviets are
Yeah.
just a little easier, or a little more intuitive, or maybe a little stronger, or a little something. And then all of a sudden, I'm just like
Mhm.
counting heads just to try to survive to the
Mhm.
next turn and convert something into
Yeah.
some kind of a momentum somewhere. And then when that thing closed, I was like, oh,
Well,
thank God.
yeah. Well, and we should just for context. So the complication roll, you roll two six-siders and you add it, and the
Yeah,
the Arab outrage is a four. So you either get a one and a three or a two and a two.
right.
And obviously the global outrage, which is I believe a 12. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
1 in 36 chance of that happening. So it's not off. It's not a huge probability, but it's one of the ones. It's better than having your nuke not go off or having it blow up where you don't want it to, as you mentioned in the video. Um,
Yeah,
that's the key thing. It's with the outrage complications, the bomb still at least goes off. So some of
right.
those are better or worse than others. Yeah, I guess my perspective on the game was I'm watching. I take my turn, and your income tracker goes from 70 down to like
I
53 or
know.
50 something.
Huge
I'm like,
swings.
and I'm attacking like 6 or 7 or 8 territories, but then like your turn comes around and it's all the way back up the other way. So I'm like, I feel like I'm spinning my tires a little bit.
Yeah.
Was kind of um and like yeah, my grand plan more or less was um with the U.S. I'm like if I go heavy into Europe, maybe I can sort of daisy chain something from France into the northern territories like Norway or something like that. And it just the ability to pull back into like Finland and Orel, I didn't really have an answer for.
Hmm.
Um, and I think one thing we've said before is like a strategy in East and West that doesn't work fast probably doesn't work at all, or something to that effect.
Hmm.
So I think
Ah, I see what you're saying.
the one thing I remember is so I had it in my head that so there's a tank that starts in Okinawa, and I had it in my head that I'm going to drop that tank in the Western U.S. So on the first turn, I wanted to group up my navies a certain way, so I only moved it to Guam, but I could have moved it to Hawaii. And if I had done that, I could have got it through the canal like a turn sooner or 2 turns sooner. So I'm like, in hindsight, I'm like, maybe I would have done that differently, and just speed up that, or just say screw it and just rather than moving all of my transports over, just build new ones just so that they're there, that extra couple turns early or whatever.
I see. Yeah, I see.
Um, yeah, and then I actually wrote about it in the East and West thread on the .org forums. So link in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wrote a post about Pakistan, and essentially, like the gist of it is, yeah, it's only worth one IPCs, but if you're the British and you're stuck in India, and the Soviets have a huge blob of dudes in Pakistan, you're stuck and you can't get out.
Right, right. I agree.
And yeah. So the other thing was like, it might seem like it's only one IPC territory, but because of the infantry placement rule, that's one extra infantry that you can place right on the front line.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hold it and the Soviets don't hold it, it's kind of like a +2 net kind of a swing, if you look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of contemplating that, and I have enough familiarity with the game to know that the British, their production plus the assets that they have in the area, it's not quite enough to really hold it. So I'm like, they need either one or both of their allies to help them out, and I kind of started narrowing in on using the Western Europe. So what I had said in that post was, you take guys from Italy, and I was like, oh, you take your 2 infantry from Italy, move it to Sudan, and the next turn you go to Pakistan. And then when I was writing about the Americans, I'm like, you could take 2 infantry or a tank. And then so when I got to actually playing the game, I'm like, Western Europe has a tank in Italy. I could just send the tank instead of the 2 infantry, because I realized, when you're Western Europe, you don't have a lot of infantry in Western Europe. You don't have a lot of anything. And there's these giant stacks of Soviet infantry. So my offensive units are doing me no good over there. Like, I'm never going to be in a position to attack with them in Europe. So I'm like, well, why not send them, over to Pakistan? So by kind of keeping the jaws from closing in that theater, I have that opportunity where I can attack into Turkmenistan.
Right.
And then if the British manage to outstack the Soviets, they might possibly be able to attack Iran. Ignoring the fact that having bombers there just makes you put guys on every single territory so they don't get taken over by paratroopers.
Right.
Yeah, so I was just like, well, we'll give this a try. And I think this game in particular, you had a really bad outcome in Greece and especially in West Germany. So I was like, well, this will leave me a little bit weaker in Europe in the early get-go until the U.S. kind of ramps up. But given that specific circumstance, I'm like, let's just give it a try and see how it goes, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And being on the receiving end of this, there was I think it was turn 2 or 3. Actually, I have it up in front of me. There was a point where I think I said it in the video at some point. Like I probably should have attacked Pakistan because it wasn't a for sure thing. In fact, I didn't even know that was the goal of yours. I mean, but I did kind of do a cursory check to see, okay, if he did do that, and then it was once it got around 80, I was like, and I thought I slopped it, but I didn't. I was like, it's like high 70s, low 80s. He's gonna pull back, and then you didn't, and I was like, oh God, really? Okay, so now I really do have to look at this, and I blinked because I didn't want to. I was like, I can get a better. Yeah, that's a. Now I remember how I was thinking. I was like, I can get a better deal than 20% chance of a loss or 25% chance of a loss, and I let it slip, and then I was like, and then your plan started, the machinery started working. And it was like, okay, now we have a problem because Pakistan is, insofar as the Soviets, if the Soviets have it, then they can keep the British and I guess the Western Europeans in this situation. They've been bottled up in India at their leisure, frankly. At least that's my experience in past games. But this now it's hugely problematic. Them being there in force was just causing all kinds of headaches all over, as you said. There was just the swing in IPCs, because I usually tend towards hedgehog defenses, which is what the word I call for stacking your stuff behind or around the territories and not trying to defend them all at once. But then, so you can get them back, but I wasn't gaining any ground. As you pointed out, it was just like, neither of us was like. That's why it's like this is really interesting because who's taking the initiative here? It's hard to tell. Like we're just trading territories, but
It felt like a game of Risk almost, where
yeah,
you trade in your cards and then you sweep across half the board and then you run out of steam and then the
yep,
other guy trades in their cards and sweep
yeah,
across half the board.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
um, and then I started counting heads. I was like, what is this? Is this territory swapping hurting someone else more than it's
Mm.
and if you I still have the notes on I had a little whiteboard. I started tracking everything and I was like, okay, it's actually hurting NATO just slightly more, but is that actually sustainable given the fact that we have this third dimension with all these spies and all this stuff is changing all the time? And I wasn't 100% certain. And so I think I've decided I need to start closing up these wounds. Like I need to start. I'll still try to hedgehog, but I need to pick a couple territories and not let Western, the Allies, NATO, back in. And
Mm.
I'm still. Hang on, let me just see where we're up to turn 6 here, right? Yeah. I've got the map up in
Mm.
front just to remind me. And then, yeah, okay, then the nuclear breakthrough. I think that was perhaps the biggest thing. The Soviets finally landed the nuke on turn 6, and both of our sets of spies and whatnot, had done quite a bit of damage to each other. I think, yeah, the NATO collected Spain, uh, killed a couple spies.
I just recall, I think on your first four counterintelligence attempts, you hit 3 times.
First 4 counter intel. Well, there was the very first counter intel hit, and then there was a turn where the Soviets hucked
Yeah.
3 counter intels and rolled 2 hits. So those were all of the hits for counter intel the whole game. There was no other.
Mhm.
Those were the 3.
Yeah, I just seen after that you rolled more times, but I think you missed. But I
Right.
kind of lose track of how many more rolls there were. But yeah, yeah, I think that was the real issue for me because, and I posted in my comment under the video is I'm looking at it like um, for the first couple turns, I think you can send the UK Navy up north to land in Norway or Comey or anywhere along
Mm-hmm.
that coastline. But the plan basically was that the Americans had to take over because what I actually trying to do is sending British guys into France and Italy so that there's that constant like Congo line going through so that they can either hit Yugoslavia or if you have transports in the Mediterranean you can hit Greece or you can um, hit Turkey or if West Europe lands in Turkey you can add guys there. Um, and I kind of so when you got the nuke, I was like, well, my northern offensive is kind of fizzled out, and now my navy that's making my Turkey offensive is kind of all split up, and so it's probably gonna get picked off. So I didn't really see like any place to keep gaining ground at that point.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. My feeling was with that. Just to give you the. Yeah, I appreciate those struggles. First, I'll say that of NATO, especially with it all busted up. I mean, with the canal closed and you're in these packets, right? There's little naval packets, and the
Mhm.
bomb can nuke 5 ships. And this might be a universal thing, or just something to know to anybody listening. When the Soviets have the bomb, insofar as I'm playing this game or have played this game, it appears the best thing to do is nuke boats. Uh, that I guess
Mhm.
if there's a situation
Totally
where,
agree.
yeah, okay, I was gonna say because there's an EMP effect where you freeze aircraft in this, in one position, that can have a tactical advantage or force a strategic result on the enemy's turn because they're frozen for the whole world turn essentially in place. But otherwise, the Soviet blowing up 5 boats a turn eventually cuts through the units protecting the transports, and then out they go. The pain point is the 20 IPC price tag, which is effectively an opportunity cost of 10 infantry for the Soviets, where it's 6 2/3 for the NATO. And I was really, my feeling was, okay, I don't know if I'm going to even use this thing because I don't know if I even want to deploy this. But the threat of it is, just the threat of a nuke, and knowing that it, and my opponent knowing, if your opponent's decent, probably should know, that thing has got
Can
five boats' names on it at some point soon. So
yeah,
yeah, go for it.
yeah. The thing that I think stands out is because there's like so many rounds where you're cashing out at like 70 IPCs or higher. I think
Mm-hmm.
if you see the U.S., if you go into a Pacific strategy, you're actually taking away more territory from the Soviets, so it's easier to keep their income down. Whereas if basically the problem
Hmm.
for NATO is that
That's interesting.
if you're if you're attacking a territory owned by Western Europe by anyone other than Western Europe, you don't get any money for it, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I was keeping tabs
So
on that. Yeah.
With a Europe first strategy, unless you're landing in Karelia or Komi, you're doing a lot of that, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, a lot of those great territories in Western Europe's the first to go. So if Western Europe doesn't get them, that's IPCs gained that aren't gained. Um,
Yeah. So that was the thing. I'm like, I really need him to not get the nukes because he's definitely got enough money for it. Was kind of my
right.
thought.
I see. I see. Yeah. Yeah. And I was keeping an eye on that too, and I was like, well, okay. So that was the thing that was. That's again why I reached out. I reached out offline and was like, this is might be the best game because the parrot, it was like economic. I was counting out. So when I play this game, I count. I'll just let you and everybody know the way I sort of analyze the economy is how many infantry can Russia build versus how many infantry can all of NATO build, and we were about a
They're
piece.
about the same.
Yeah,
Kind of.
they're about the same, or a piece under even. So I was like, okay, so the economy's. I don't need to. Nobody needs to hit the panic button with regards to the economy. It's all about what can we convert on the map. That's the way I was looking at it. Is there any tactical or strategic changes I can make on the map? And tactical, I mean harvesting enemy units at an exchange rate that favors me, or pinning down
Mm.
territories in terms of the strategic point of view, pinning down territories and not letting them be recaptured because I'm hemorrhaging IPCs over to him. So if I can just lock down my own territories, the economy swings back over to the Soviet side. That was my thought process on the final turn. I was like, this is the way I'm proceeding, and then of course put pressure on
Yeah.
India. The Xinjiang flank, that was also a big. Like if had been some spy breakthroughs on the side of NATO, that would have sucked
Mm.
because
And
I put it all on
I think
red.
honestly, I think I misplayed, and I probably should have done that
The
sooner. Like
Spain
rather
versus.
than killing the spot that I did, is
Mm-hmm.
I should have. If so, there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on.
Go ahead.
Um, so with your strategy, I think what's becoming apparent, and this when I look at the game that we played before this, where I was playing as the Soviets and I ended up attacking the Arab League, I think that you have to keep China on side, and even if you're going through Iran, you need to eventually migrate those guys into Xinjiang, possibly to
Hmm.
put pressure on India, especially if there is a giant stack in Pakistan that you just can't dislodge. Um, I will say, somewhat related to that, the old school way of playing, 20 some odd years ago, most people didn't ever attack neutrals as the USSR, like very, very infrequently.
Hmm.
And so what you didn't see was that stack of infantry that starts in Moscow moving to Georgia to attack Iran on the second turn. What happened was they would move into Kazakhstan, and then they would move into Xinjiang. So then, in
Ah,
addition with whatever else you had there, there's this big stack in Xinjiang that can attack Pakistan or can attack India. And so usually your British people would opt to back up into India,
I
right?
see. I see.
And the other thing is, what made a lot of my attacks possible was you were in Georgia and Turkey, like they can each place three infantry, but you were placing two infantry. So even if all I can throw at it is two paratroopers and a couple of fighters, to me it's like, well, just risk it for the biscuit because the worst that's going to happen is you get two hits on the first round and then I retreat my planes out.
Right.
So by adding that third infantry, that would have made me like, kind of,
Oh, interesting.
rethink.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually made a mistake. So when the first time I attacked Turkmenistan, you had a heavy tank in Moscow, and I was like, well, I don't really want to lose these guys because if he throws everything at me, then the odds, he might try it. And was like, oh, but if I take out the infantry in Turkmenistan, that's one less infantry that can attack me, and that blocks the path of the heavy tank coming down from Moscow. But I realized that's not true because that tank can go through Xinjiang as well to also Pakistan. So I was looking at it and I was like, okay, if this battle goes badly, I'm going to use my Americans bombers to paratroop guys into Pakistan to bail out my defense and hope that's enough to hold.
Huh.
But I won that battle, so I was like, okay, well, we'll do something else with those bombers. But that was kind of my contingency plan.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing I need to correct you is there's something you said in the video. So I wasn't so much worried about India. It's more the fact of losing it and also having the giant stack right there. Because basically what that means is I can't land my planes there.
In India or in
Yeah,
Pakistan?
in India.
I see.
So here's the thing. So Western Europe, I have a bunch of guys in Pakistan. So if Western Europe retakes the territory on their turn, that means that the British will have controlled it from the start of their turn.
Correct.
So they can place infantry there.
Right.
But they can't land planes because of that specific rule in East and West.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Okay,
in hindsight, I should have pulled back to India one turn sooner, just so that I could have my planes there. But in terms of actually producing those 3 infantry every turn, I don't need to. But now we're in a position where it's like you can put that whole giant stack into India if I don't move into it. And if I don't have my planes defending it, I might lose. So. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah. And I think we're seeing. We'll move to the other game here shortly, but I think we're playing a game now that's not being advertised on YouTube, but it's sort of a. It looks to me, and we don't have to give up. You don't have to give up anything, but just anybody listening, it looks like we're revisiting this Pakistan defense. And the lesson I learned from this game that we're talking about currently is that has to be taken seriously. And as a Soviet player, that was so. I've never felt so kneecapped as a Soviet player. Like that to me deserves all my attention, and it has. I don't feel like I'm giving up too much by saying in the current game we're playing, it has my full attention now. So
yeah, it's making minor adjustments. Like I said, there's a couple things that I called out as I would want to change or I would need to change. So I'm kind of starting off with a little bit of a different idea, but I think
okay.
I guess the other mentality is when we played, me and my friend back in the day, like we were always kind of under the impression that the Soviets have to either solidly take India or solidly take France in order to win. But the thing is, like the Pacific, like it's like the Americans can win the war by going into the Pacific, but they can't really the Soviets can't win the war like in that theater.
I would
So
agree. That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like we've kind of established that there is a Pacific strategy that works, and so now I'm like, okay, well,
What
are
else?
the alternative strategies?
Right.
Do any of them work, right?
And
And so it's like obviously your priorities are France and India if that's the mindset that you're going with.
yeah, and my hat's off to you. That with the community stands to better for people, or stands to get better, but with folks who are willing to experiment to the extremes that you are. So that that's I think that's very
And
good.
I would say as a somewhat unrelated tangent, but I think I've looked back at some of our longer games, and honestly, the ones that are longer and more interesting and closer are where less happens in terms of spying. Maybe not so much in the tech. So I'm kind of the opinion that because there is so much randomness, I could see people souring on the game if they have like a really random, wildly unlikely outcome in terms of that. So I would say like the first couple times you play the game, maybe just ignore that stuff, and then
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you like it on like a tactical strategic combat level, then go back and read those rules and see if that's something you want to add to your game.
Yeah. No, as a probability. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Right, like they're built into the rules, but not to the point where it's messy to like extract those things out and play without them.
Yeah, it's not egregious either way. So, I would add, as somebody who pays a lot of attention to probabilities with dice, that it's not. So long as you throw your hat in the ring, and this might be a subject all its own, but what I mean by that is, so long as you invest in spies, then there is a the probability curves are basically the same for both sides. You essentially you will hit your numbers if you roll on a long enough timeline. So eat the losses, try to throw what dice you can, either in tech or in spying, or um, you can always catch a bit of luck too. If your enemy uses a nuke, the blowback can sometimes be, affect that same dimension, the same tables down there. So it's still, I'd say it's again not
And that's
too much
one.
chrome.
Yeah, one thing I would mention on that is it's interesting because the way the complication table is designed, and I've talked to you about this, that Chinese outrage is slightly more
Yes.
likely than the Arab or the OAS outrage.
Yep.
And I think it's because they expected the Americans to be the ones primarily launching most of the nukes. But if it's the other way around, and it's the Soviets launching the nukes,
Right.
then there's a greater likelihood that China pulls their support, which means they pull out of Korea and everything else that comes with it, right?
Right, right, which is actually a piece of it, like a small incentive for the Soviets to consider, like, do I really, how bad do I want to do this? Because
Yeah.
in my experience, having China in your pocket is, being able to move in there, having those success extra infantry and getting the income, that's like a triple threat. So
Yeah.
do you really want to throw it
The
away on a 10% or whatever it is that you piss them off?
I I've seen where it's possible as the Americans to just bulldoze, just brute force your way through North Korea despite the infantry being there. But there is no better way, in my opinion, to bottle up India than have the option of moving your guys into Xinjiang.
I agree.
Even if you don't really end up doing it, like
Yeah.
that's and if you want to cause mischief, like paratrooping guys into Indochina, that's fun too.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
Also-
Yeah. It's always the threat. You make your opponent pay the paratrooper tax. You want to move to the other game?
Yep, I think that's probably a
Unless
good
if you had
spot.
something else. Because the other one the previous game, I guess was I NATO? Yeah, I was NATO and you were
Yeah.
USSR. And in the spirit of experimentation, I think you took USSR into the Middle East. You actually went up against the Arab Alliance. Uh, so what were your
Mm.
thoughts on that game?
Yeah, so I touched on it a little bit. I think in hindsight, I I should have. I, sh- I always like no matter which side I play, I always feel like I can't afford to invest in spies. But then it's also like you can't afford not to invest in spies. I think my complaint, if I had a complaint about the spying system, is that it's
Hmm.
funneling towards almost like an infantry push mechanic situation where there's one
Yeah.
correct choice. It's like you influence China, and then once you get China influenced to the level that you want it to, you kill the other spies, and it's like those are like everything else is kind of a false choice almost. Um,
That might be
but anyway,
true. That
yeah,
might be true.
I, I think that China gets way more attention than anyone else usually in most games that I've played with. Um,
Huh.
anyway, back to the game at hand though. So the specific thing I guess is, and I wrote this in the thread, the East and West thread over on the ANA.org forums. Link in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Plug it.
yeah, the the idea was essentially I'm trying to um, by skipping one battle and dispersing those offensive units into the other battles, can you decrease the number of combat rounds to a point where you have a significant number of
Hmm.
additional units remaining?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and like I've seen a couple of your games where, like, you know, in the Greece battle, you just scrape by with one infantry. It's like, eee.
Yeah.
So if it weren't for the fact that I'd already planned to do something else with my transport, like I could have possibly had West Europe do an amphibious landing in Greece against that one guy or something. But so in
Right.
this game in particular, I decided to not attack Turkey, um, and I did decide to attack Pakistan, which went horribly. um,
Right.
so the thing with that is what you're doing is you're allowing your opponent the free turn to pull the fighter out of there and to pull a couple infantry out of there using a transport.
Turkey.
But
Right.
because you're not like you're taking that extra turn to amalgamate your forces in Georgia, you can actually, if NATO doesn't reinforce Turkey, you can pretty easily take Turkey and Iran on the next turn and just kind of be at parity to where you normally would in these strategies, where you take Turkey on the first turn and Iran on the second turn.
Mm-hmm.
So, the thing is, I was looking at this game. earlier today just for reference. So I ended up with like 5 infantry in Greece, which is a lot.
Mm,
But then when I moved everything into Yugoslavia, you attacked it and just like freaking wiped everything out. So it just
yeah.
completely like mitigated all the gains that I had from saving those infantry in those opening battles. Um,
Right, right. Yeah, that was
yeah,
nuts.
yeah. Um, the Pakistan battles went really badly, so I was kind of like I said in the comments. I was like, well, I can't. I felt like I couldn't really push towards India, and I was running out of places to attack, and I needed to like keep eating stuff
Right.
to grow my economy. So I'm like, I'm just gonna attack the Arab League.
Oh,
Um,
so it wasn't a premeditated thing against the
it
Arab
was.
League.
I think the way I described it was a read and react. I'm like,
Ah,
my main thrust was going to be towards India, but if that got screwed up somehow, then that plan B was to go into the Middle East.
yeah, because,
Um,
yeah, wow. Huh. I think I
yeah.
had to remember you mentioning attacking. I know you talked about attacking China, but I couldn't remember if you talked about attacking the Arab League. And when I saw the dice rolls, my reaction, I was so clueless as to what was happening that I misread Iraq as Iran. My brain told me he was attacking Iran. I was like,
Um,
what's he attacking in Iran? I thought he had Iran. And then I had to open the game and
yeah.
look at it, and I was like, I did a double take. I was like, oh my, what? Now I got to go to the rule book and figure out what the heck happens. So, yeah, that was interesting. Yeah. And then it was a
So
dash to
one
the
thing,
Suez.
mm, so that was one thing that I kind of thought of in hindsight. So see if you can follow me on this.
Yeah.
So if on turn one you take Turkey, right?
Okay.
You can land fighters in Turkey, and then what you can do is when you attack the Arab League, you can potentially have a bomber like paratroop a guy into Jordan from like 2 spaces away,
Mm.
and also send those fighters in to attack because there's only one infantry in Jordan.
Yeah.
So if your infantry manages to survive and take that territory, then two things happen. Well, once the territories convert to Western Europe, but they can't place there. They also, even if they retake the territory, they can't land planes there. So I think that was the big thing where I was kind of like screwed is because there was like 5 fighters there. Like immediately after I attacked the Arab League, they were all in Jordan.
Ah, I see.
It has a huge defensive boost. So if you can somehow get your navy to survive, like and use that transport, that would be cool too. I don't know how realistic that is, but
I see.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. I think if you want to attack the Arab League, you probably have to plan it meticulously, where all the pieces are in place, and you do it like the second turn or third turn or something like that.
Right.
Probably like the third turn. But yeah, you really if you have your navy intact, that obviously would make it easier. But you at the bare minimum, you need to try and take over that territory of Jordan, just so that they can't land their planes there and stuff.
Yeah, and good for you for perceiving that. I worked this. Most of my time was spent working how to defend Egypt. Like I couldn't
Mm.
see the Jordan option for a while. I was just staring at it, and I was like, "How bad is this?" Because Saudi Arabia is toast, and that's a 4 IPC value territory, and I didn't want to give that up. So I first started trying to figure out how to do that, but it's essentially in a cul-de-sac. So I was like, okay, well that doesn't work, and then I can't let him have Egypt. We can't allow them to break into Africa and cause mayhem and problems in that area of the board. So at the bare minimum, it needs to be Egypt, and then I finally, saw the can we hold Jordan? And then it was like, yeah, we can. Wait a minute, that's it then. That's a gate, even though it's a crummy IPC value territory, much like Pakistan. It was like, okay, if you hold this, it's a door, and I think you'd hit the nail on the head. If you're going to do that as the Soviet player, if you can, you might have to lose a fighter, but it might be worth it if you're going to do this and you want it to succeed. Preventing them from building or landing their fighter planes in that territory has got to be part of it. It must be, unless you have overwhelming strength for some reason, as the Soviets.
Yeah. And the thing that really caught my attention is that as much as Iran is kind of a central territory in that region, Iraq borders like everything. So if you're the
Hmm.
Soviets and you're funneling everything into Iraq, like you can always be putting pressure in that direction if you need to. Um, but yeah, that's if you needed to make like a little hedgehog, to use your terminology.
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of that kind of got my attention as being a really it would be a really tough place to get the
Yeah.
Soviets out of if you decided to dig in there.
Yeah, that's true. Yep, it's borders 5
Mm.
territories as I'm looking at it. That is a rarity. One, two, three. It's like Georgia. Well, Georgia has 6,
Mm.
but yeah, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and yeah, but it's definitely a critical territory. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that
I
was a
don't know.
shorter game.
There's
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot, else to say about that game. It was kind of brief. And
I might.
were there any battles that particularly stood out to you?
No, no, I think that was it. But I might also say here's another point that would you if you wanted to sell this game, sell it to somebody who says that Axis and Allies takes too long because this game seems
Mm.
to, uh, you know, end itself within half a dozen turns. I mean, you have more
Well,
stats on that than I do.
yeah, I don't see many games go longer than that. I think we were talking about it early on, and I said it's kind of like the infantry push mechanic on crack, or the infantry push
Hmm.
mechanic on meth, or on speed, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Just because of the placement rule, it's not this thing where you're placing all your guys in your capital and
right,
marching them 3 turns, marching them across half of Eastern Europe or whatever, like
right.
half a continent thing. You know,
It
um,
it does seem to accelerate the
but
without really taking away from it. I think it moves it along at a
mm,
quicker pace.
mhm. Yeah, I think um, my complaint, and this is something just generally speaking with. I remember the Imp Games guy saying like they wanted their tech to be like really strong and impactful and like game altering, but they never got like the rock paper scissors thing figured out. So I feel like there's certain techs, particularly in East and West, maybe less so in the other games, where it's like certain techs for certain countries are really strong, and that like there isn't necessarily a counter to them. And I think that's kind of my sense, and I think I've mentioned it to you, is like there isn't really a direct counter to nukes. There's maybe an indirect one by like influencing some minor countries and putting factories in there and using that instead of using a navy as NATO. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's very asymmetrical. Um,
Well, that might be historically accurate. The
and I think,
quickness
well, I
and
think, yeah, like I said, the about the previous game is it's if the Soviets have a whole bunch of income, and like eventually they're just gonna keep rolling that tech and rolling that tech and rolling that tech, and they will get the bombs, and then
right.
if they have enough money to build them, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So I that's why I think in a longer game it's going to favor the Soviets because they're going to get that upper hand.
Hmm.
That that like NATO doesn't really have an answer for. I don't personally think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if we get to a long
Here's
game, uh, things always end by like turn. I don't know, between 4 and 6, right? Most of them.
we've had a couple that have gone to 8, and I think
Oh,
one
really?
was 7.
Okay. Okay.
Let me refer to my spreadsheet actually. Um, so I've got a Soviet win on S8 and a NATO win on like US 7.
Right.
And then this one was round 6, this last one. So
Uh,
those are kind of the longest ones.
so I actually played. I'll say I have something to say. This is kind of an oblique comment, but irrelevant. It's I played one of my gaming buddies named Ragnell, just introducing him to this game, and it was a truly bizarre game. Like the dice were, it was just wacky. And
Yeah.
one of the things that happened by whatever turn, by turn 5 or something, was the NATO had the I always get confused. Is it fusion or fission? Fusion, the 20 IPC killer. Okay, and
Yeah.
this was a question that I have an opinion on it, and I've never I don't think I ever nailed this down with you, but they're at start nuke.
Oh.
I'm assuming that once you get fusion, that nuke, the at start nuke, blasts 10 pieces because that's what the tech does. It doubles the kill ratio. Instead of 5 pieces being removed, it's 10. And he used that
Yeah.
on the turn that he got the breakthrough. He just eviscerated 10 Soviet pieces and then had another one coming right behind it. And I just gave him the game. I was like, all right, the Soviet economy is good, but it's not that good because I didn't plan for him to have that breakthrough on that turn, and I'll just, in short, it wasn't just infantry. It was my guts. It was a lot of my guts came out.
Yeah. That's one of those things that I remember we had the discussion about, and it doesn't appear in the electronic version of the second edition rules or the second edition like
Yeah.
changes or in the FAQ. But it's one of those, trust me, bro. Back when I played, like
Okay.
I remember the in-game guy saying that the fission weapon and fusion weapon are different units, and I can recall,
Really?
like, I
Oh.
can recall, I can recall playing the games like because some of us still played just play by email. Like we didn't use MapView for everything, and I can remember the abbreviation we used was FIW and FUW because they were two
Wow.
different units. Um, Now, that being said, if you read the text, I completely agree with the interpretation because
Right.
because it says you can choose to deploy fission weapons or fusion weapons when you purchase a nuclear weapon,
Right.
but nowhere else in the text does it use the word deploy to specify buying stuff. It's only when they're talking about launching nukes.
Huh.
So it seems like the original text was written in such a way that like it was an upgrade, and then they kind of realized that maybe they should dial that back, but never like put it in writing, except maybe
Hmm.
on the forums, which obviously, like I said, got nuked by spam bots, so that's like gone to the sands of time.
Okay.
Um, for me, it's one of those things where it's like if a
No.
game gets to that point, I would just play it rules as written and just treat it as an upgrade.
Well,
Um,
I appreciate the whole like, especially if the game designer, the game designers were kind of playing it like that too, right? Where you said it was FI and F, whatever. Were they playing? Were they in
FU.
on that? Yeah, FU. Were they?
FUW.
Were they in on it like that too? They were they playing
Yeah,
it?
that was like they would comment on our questions on the board and stuff like that. So they would give us feedback on rules questions. And that was one I kind of distinctly remember.
Okay, so it probably is.
Yeah.
They probably meant it more as the intent versus, let's just use legal terms. The intent, if not the literal
Yeah.
uh,
The rules
interpret.
as written versus rules as intended.
That,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think intent should be. I'm changing my. You've changed my opinion. If that's what you remember, and then I would say clearly their intent was that they meant deploy, meant purchase, instead of. But why would you need to make the distinction? Here's another question: why would you need to make the distinction? It would in what in either case? In what world would you want to only remove 5 pieces as opposed to 10?
Yeah, I haven't given it much thought, but there might be an edge case where, like, the only thing I can think of is if you're let's say you're Western Europe and you got the nukes and you wanted to like clear a bunch of units off the territory but you didn't want to reduce the IPC value or the production value.
Oh.
You only want to reduce it by one instead of two, and then so that your allies could capture it or something like that. There
Oh, I
are,
see. Right.
yeah. So there's edge cases where it's like, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, I wonder why they would use the word deploy if they meant purchase, though. I guess that's my last hang up.
Yeah.
That's a really.
Yeah, because that I don't have it pulled up in front of me, although I could, but I vaguely remember it's like when they're
I can read
describing
it.
what the tech does.
Yeah, here I'll just read
Yeah,
it so everybody can hear it. So this
yeah.
is the point of discussion here. It says fusion bomb. You know, if you get the fusion upgrade, I am become as death, the destroyer of worlds. So said J. Robert Oppenheimer, quoting the whatever that is, Gita,
Mega
as
Vegeta.
yeah, as he witnessed the first explosion of a hydrogen bomb. The power of these devices dwarfed the uranium and plutonium bombs previously developed. The Pacific Islands used as test grounds for these weapons were literally vaporized. Benefits, and here it is. Atomic weapons are at double strength, and then in parentheses, destroying 10 enemy units, and reduce a territory's value by 2 credits for 1 round, and that's opposed to 1. Note that a player may choose to deploy fission weapons instead. That the placement of that
Yeah.
sentence and the word choice of deploy as opposed to purchase does make me feel like if I was just reading that right after reading how it reduces a territory by 2 credits, does make me feel that they were are trying to communicate that you can choose to use one or the other when you're firing it. But that, realism aside, obviously that makes no sense in
No.
realistic terms. But my opinion on that is if you're playing Axis and Allies for realism, you're playing the wrong game.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I remember when we talked about this before. I did a quick Control F on the document, and the words
Yep.
deploy or deployment is strictly only used
Yep.
in the context of firing nuclear weapons
Yeah, it's not helpful.
in the entire document. Yeah. So, yeah, I like I said, it's just my personal,
Yeah.
and if you find anyone else who was on the forums at the time who might remember and could tell you, oh yeah, that's totally how it was. But in terms of what's written down that we can refer to, them being distinct types of IDA units
Yeah.
isn't written.
So yeah, if anybody is listening that knows the answer to this question, just leave it in the comments section or reach out to the Janus or
And don't
myself.
forget to like and subscribe.
Yes, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Yeah. Let's see what else is there.
And the only other one I can recall in terms of rules is that came up in our game is the if attacked and not totally captured in terms of neutral territories.
Oh yeah, which
Uh,
hasn't blown up in our
yeah.
faces yet, but I did pick. Oh, that's right. I was rereading the rules about that. So for all those listening, if a neutral country is attacked, it says that the country aligns itself with the closest NATO power. That's all it says. So if you have two territories that are one space away, that are one or two or three different NATO powers, what do you do? And then we were discussing, well, maybe they meant capital, but this is that's a layer of complexity. So I think in one of our games
Well,
on
and the other
YouTube,
thing
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, specifically what came up in our game is because you attacked Switzerland, right?
Mhm.
But you took it over completely.
Mhm.
So it doesn't become owned by Western Europe, or because it got taken over completely, it doesn't become owned by Western Europe. Because I was attacking it with the UK and saying I want the UK to get the money for this,
Yeah.
because my interpretation is that it doesn't belong to anyone necessarily.
Oh wow, yeah, you're right. I just defaulted to that, but I didn't even think of that. So what you're saying is, by that rule,
Yeah,
does it
because
is it
that
a
was the thing with
permanent? Yeah.
yeah. So, because when I was attacking neutrals, like I would just put the neutral armies on, and then when you were attacking those territories, you're like, I'm going to put the West Europe guys here because obviously these belong to West Europe now. I'm like, maybe. I mean, they definitely do if you retreat
Fall
out of
back.
the battle and there's something
Right.
left, but if you don't, it's less clear.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, point number two. Anybody listening to this that might know or have some insight to this, just verify it for us. Because actually, this might be a fun point to bring up, and I'll try to cap this at an hour and
I
a
did.
half. But um,
Sure.
did you say that somebody said this is not that this was designed as a beer and pretzels game? Because I relish that comment.
Yeah, someone who shall remain anonymous
Okay,
was
all
like,
right. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what the content was, but I think it's way too sweaty was the word I used.
Huh. Interesting. That's sort of interesting. Sweaty, as in like profusely sweating, or to sweat.
Yeah,
Ah,
intention and stuff
that's
like that.
that's a good. I like that. That's the yeah. But it wasn't designed to be played. I don't think that even if you're the this is almost the artist isn't everything is open, art is open to all interpretation. The artist isn't even the one who has the final say. I've heard this argument, and I would apply the same to the board games. Chess can be
Mhm.
a beer and pretzels game. You can play chess with your friends in a totally beer and pretzels manner. It's also on the other extreme. It's one of the most professional board games. It is probably the most professionalized board game in the world. So I don't think it's up to the anyone to say what it is and isn't. And the level of detail, I mean, somebody took the time and effort to create this thing. Somebody cared. This, if it was leaky, if it was a leaky
Yeah.
game, it would show. And it doesn't leak very much. It looks pretty tight. So where there is a leak, we're
Well,
just like,
and I
well,
think
that fix that.
yeah. Even just the fact that we believe it's something derived from World at War, which is like a deliberate intention of making a more complicated Axis and Allies.
Right.
it's like I want this game to be a lot more complicated and a lot more involved in this game they already liked, but does that transcend it from being a beer and pretzels game? I would say it's definitely pushing the envelope, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, a lot of there's a lot. Yeah, I would actually probably, having only played World of War like 3 times when I was 12. I would still, from my memory of it, put East and West just a notch above it in terms of accessibility because of the there was just
Mm.
so many rules, as you pointed out. There were so many special
Mm.
abilities and special rules, and I get that, and this is we don't have to go down this. This is a rabbit hole for a different conversation, but I
Tune in next week.
I know that people say they like this stuff, but and I've done this, when you poll people, namely on the Facebook pages, you can't do it on the forums. When you poll people when you poll people who claim to play Axis and Allies, what most of them really are talking about is playing solitaire, or just being, or not even solitaire, and just being a collector. They played it a handful of times with their
Yeah.
friends. They like the fact that they own the plastic pieces, and that's the other
Mm.
thing. There's sort of a plastic piece obsession, and then you want to develop rules around each of these unique plastic pieces, and then before you know it, you have a game that is just inaccessible to so many
Plurality. Yeah.
people. Yeah, and World at War. I remember being a kid and I was like, okay, this is super cool, but I can't get anybody to play the damn thing. And I did play it. Ended up playing it a bunch of times solitaire, and I did end up playing. I played my brother. I got my brother to play it. He's 10, I'm 12, and it's no good when you have to sit there. I know the rule book. He doesn't, because it's too. He could
Oh
barely
yeah.
get through Axis and Allies. How are you going to get through this when you amplify the complexity? So I would put East and West a peg over that. It's definitely not that rulesy. There's a third edition rules, and you're
Mm.
pretty much good to go.
Mm. It is definitely. I think the fact that it is a three versus one kind of a setup, it makes it less of a like a party game. You know what I mean? Like it's slants itself more towards a one versus one setup. Where if you were playing, you know,
Ah, I see.
Global 40 or something like that, you could have three of your friends on each team, kind of
That's a good point.
playing around. And that's what Imp Games I think was trying to do with their the Great War game,
Uh,
because it was a three versus three. Uh,
Interesting.
so they had basically Spain, Italy, and Bulgaria were treated as the major neutral alliances, and then it was Britain, France, and Russia against Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey. So they were definitely going more for that accessible party game with your friends
Uh
with
huh.
that heading. Um, whereas East and West is it's kind of it is what it has to be. Like I think
Hmm.
if you put the game later in the Cold War, there's too many nukes going off, and it's not suited to an Axis and Allies type of game. If you uh, go further into the years of like decolonization, it's like, well, do we need a world map, or do we just need like a northern hemisphere map, or just a Europe map?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of exists in that sweet spot where it is exactly what it has to be to fit narratively into what it's doing,
Yeah.
and it's like it's they fudged the timeline a little bit with a few things, but really it's not alt history until you start the game.
Yeah. I was just yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
cleanest way of putting it. I couldn't agree more. I think this is a great. The game concept is really
Mm.
great. It's just a derivation off of what almost happened. This
Yeah.
came this
And,
close, and if it had, it would have at least looked something like this at a grand scale, even the
yeah.
detail aside.
And that goes back to what I was saying before, where um, the if you want this to be a world map, there's very few wars you can actually do that with. Like even World War One,
Right.
most of the time isn't a world map.
That's another good
So
point.
it's kind of you got your World War Two, and then it's like Cold War maybe. And I mean like every war that's popped up in the past 20 years, I hear someone, oh, I gotta make an Axis Allies game about this, and I'm like, well, no, like it definitely wouldn't be a world map. Um,
Right, right.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
it kind of fits in nicely. That's why that might be part of the reason why I've kind of felt after playing just the first couple games, I kind of raised eyebrows and I thought to myself, this thing is deserves to be canon. It's that
yeah.
good, I think.
There's a there, I think is what you said.
Yeah, there's a there
Yeah.
there. Yeah, there's something here.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting because I know like the Hasbro partnered with Renegade Games and they're going to release a new Access and Allies game or two, and they're going to reprint stuff. But I don't know that they would kind of touch this subject matter really.
Yeah, I don't know. It remains
Mm.
to be seen. I've reached out to them on a couple different levels for different subjects, but yeah, I know they have Africa coming out, and they're going to be present at Gen Con, and outside of that, I don't know what plans they have for the franchise. I guess it remains to be seen. But very cool.
Mm.
Did you have any
Well,
closing comments or anything else you wanted to cover?
no, I think that about wraps it up. I mean,
Yeah.
we touched everything that we planned on. I tried to stay on topic as much as I could without going into wild theory crafting and crap like that. That would waste time.
Yeah.
But we maybe next time we can talk about that.
Is there anything? Is there any? Did you want to leave anything here to if people wanted to reach out to you? Because between us both, the Janus is the resident expert on the game. I know I rely on him for rules and for history and for all of that stuff. Did you want to leave anything in case somebody hears this?
Like I said, I would say if you want to talk about the game, if you have questions about the game, if
Sure,
you know,
I'll
if you
post
need a
it.
copy of the rules, the the forums, like if you want to put a link in the description
Yeah,
to
I will.
the West thread, they just changed my Discord, so now I am officially the guy named PD0T.
Okay, P dot
Is
P.
my Discord,
Okay, so
but it's
I'll leave it all in the link in the description box below. So any East and Westers out there, you can reach out to
mm,
the Janus, or you can reach out to myself here, or even email me at ryanvoz@yahoo.com, or I'm the good captain on the forums, because we're always looking for more
mm,
players, I guess, at the very least.
yeah.
Okay.
He's getting bored of beating me all the time. I think.
Oh no, 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 no. Okay, yeah. There's a context to this. I'm not an experimenter. I'll just put this out there right now. I play with whatever works best, and then wait for somebody like the Janus to come along and show me how it doesn't work or where it doesn't work. And in that last game, that I learned a lot. That was insane. That was more of an L for me than it was for Russia than it was for NATO, in my opinion. So yeah, um, yeah. No, keep on gaming. Okay.
Cool, sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna. Uh, everybody, take care. Thanks for listening. All the best from the good captain, and bye bye.